We would like to recognize the Algonquin Nation on whose traditional unceded territory the National Arts Centre is located. Nous rendons hommage à la nation algonquine en qui nous voyons une gardienne du passé, du présent et de l'avenir de ce territoire. Hello, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to this Musically Speaking. My name is Alexander Shelley. I'm the music director of Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra. And for those of you who have joined me before, a very warm welcome back. For those of you who are joining for the first time, thank you for being with us and welcome. Musically Speaking is an hour-long live session which we welcome stars of the music world, the music industry, to share their perspectives about their life, their art, their craft, and their music, and more, if possible. We've had a break of quite some months since the last episode, which was back in 2020, before the NAC Orchestra was able to return to live performance again. And although our upcoming concert at the end of the month, which was closely connected to today's episode, has had to be postponed due to the restrictions here in Ontario, I'm absolutely thrilled that we can look forward to performing for you in June, July and beyond as we cautiously and with fingers crossed reopen, this time hopefully for good. You can look out for what's coming up on our website, and you can also look back at the many concerts that we have given over the last year. All of the then live streams are now available to experience online. Over the course of this Musically Speaking series, we've had a wonderful, extraordinary list of guests, including James Ennis, Gabriela Montero, Jan Leszecki, Misha Brugger-Gossman, Jeremy Dutcher, Canada's former Governor General, Julie Payette, and the violinist Daniel Hope. And today we have a very, very special episode ahead of us as we welcome not just one, not two, but three extraordinary artists. Music by each of these three composers should have been featured on our upcoming concert on May 29th. And this discussion would have then offered you, our audience, an insight into the personalities behind the works before you enjoyed the pieces in concert. And I'm thrilled that despite the cancellation, we can still benefit from some time with these great creative artists. And I thank them from the bottom of my heart, from our collective NAC heart, for being with us. So let me introduce them. From Midland, Ontario, of Métis and French-Canadian descent, we welcome Ian Cusson, a composer of song, opera and orchestral work, who's joined me before actually in this series. His wonderful music explores, among other things, the Canadian Indigenous experience, including the history of the Métis people, the hybridity of mixed racial identity, and the intersection of Western and Indigenous cultures. He's the recipient of numerous awards and grants, and we had the great pleasure of welcoming him into our NAC family as an inaugural Carrefour Composer in residence in 2017. He was with us until 2019. He's currently the composer in residence for the Canadian Opera Company and the co-director of opera at the Banff Centre. For our upcoming concert, he created a brand new orchestral version of his song cycle, Where There's a War, based on Joy Kugawa poetry. And now we'll just have to wait for the joy of premiering it. Welcome to you, Ian. It's a great pleasure to see you again, and thank you for being back with us here at Musically Speaking.
Thanks for having me, Alexander.
Now, described by NPR as one of today's most eclectic composers, Vivian Fung is a JUNO Award-winning Canadian composer and a longtime friend of the NAC Orchestra. Most recently, we premiered her symphonic work, Earworms, that was a couple of seasons ago, a musical depiction of our diverted attention spans, which was a great joy for the orchestra and audience alike. And on May 29th, we would have performed her concerto for two violins with our concertmaster and associate concertmaster, Yosuke Kawasaki and Jessica Lineback, playing the solo parts. Vivian is also a recipient of a long list of grants and awards. She is an associate composer of the Canadian Music Centre and serves on the board of the American Composers Forum. Her music is embraced as part of the core repertoire by orchestras from Philadelphia to Toronto to Karlsruhe in Germany. And it's a great pleasure to welcome her today. Hello, Vivian. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
And finally, a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, Jerod Impichchaachaaha Tate, is a dedicated American Indian classical composer and pianist who expresses his native culture in symphonic music ballet, and opera. All of his compositions have been commissioned by major North American orchestras, ensembles, and organizations, and his works are performed throughout the world. He has a close relationship with San Francisco Symphony as composer, conductor, and pianist in their currents program, and was recently guest composer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Balcony Bar program, Home with Ethel and Friends. For me personally, I first came into contact with his music actually only a few months ago, and I have since become a great admirer. I was so looking forward to performing a movement of his music, the brilliantly virtuosic Moccasin Dance with the NAC Orchestra in a few weeks' time. But again, I'll just have to be patient, and I had hoped that was going to be the beginning of an exploration of Jerod's work over the coming seasons, and it will be. We just need to find the right moment. So thank you, Jerod, for being with us, and a very warm welcome.
Chokma Maestro, Chokmashki Yakoke.
So, question off the bat: do any of you actually know each other personally? Have you ever met in person?
Well, you know how inbred this whole classical music industry is. So Ian and I go back a long way. He actually came to the premiere of Earworms, right? And he was there reading us on. So I first knew about him, and he was the Carrefour Composer in residence. So I heard about him then. Yeah. And we've just stayed in touch. And Ian and I are actually in a project together with the Edmonton Opera currently. And then Jerod and I have not officially met, but we've met virtually. And I've been a fan of his stuff for a long time. And we served on a grant panel together recently. So the world is
5 days. We met each other. We were online for 5 days with each other for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, and I'm glad that we have the three of you in this virtual room together. And there's lots I want to explore in only an hour that we have together. But one of the things I've been doing in these musically speakings is starting off with a kind of lightning quick fire round of either or questions, just as a quick insight into our guests' minds. So I'm basically going to go through asking Jerod, then Vivian, then Ian, then Jerod, then Vivian, then Ian. And if you can answer from the gut, that's great. There are no right or wrong answers here. There's nothing weird here, but it's just lovely to get an insight into how you immediately respond. So if you're ready, and of course you get a veto. If you don't want to answer, just say, go away, Alex. We don't want to answer. So here we go. Good luck to all of you. Jerod, silence or sound?
Sound.
Vivian, city lights or green expanses?
Both.
Okay, we can do that. We can do that. Ian, vocal or instrumental?
A vocal.
Jerod, rhythm or harmony?
Rhythm.
Vivian, chamber or symphonic?
Symphonic.
Ian, tundra or jungle?
Tundra.
I thought you might say that. Jerod, Beatles or Boulez?
Neither.
Nice. Vivian, Dutch master or graffiti artist?
Graffiti artist.
Ian, cordon bleu or burger?
Burger.
Okay, you both went with kind of the same answer. Different questions, kind of the same answer. Jerod, head or heart?
Heart.
Vivian, old school or avant-garde?
Avant-garde.
Ian, fiction or non?
Fiction.
Jerod, deadlines or freedom?
Deadlines.
Vivian, which is more fulfilling, the process or the outcome?
Process.
Ian, popular success or the admiration of your peers?
Admiration of peers.
Jerod, inspiration or craftsmanship?
Inspiration.
Vivian, listen or talk?
Listen.
Ian, Sistine Chapel or Grand Canyon?
Grand Canyon. Ooh.
Jerod, Schubert or Shostakovich?
Shostakovich.
Vivian, Beethoven or Bach?
Ooh.
Hard, huh?
Beethoven.
Beethoven, okay. Ian, Mozart or Mendelssohn?
Mendelssohn.
Nice. Jerod, if you could meet and talk to anyone in history, who would it be?
Oh gosh, Edmund Pickens was our first elected tribal chief in 1856, and he's my great-great-great-grandfather.
Oh wow, that's a beautiful answer. Vivian, if you weren't a composer, what would your dream job be?
2 dream jobs. a percussionist because I get to hit things around for a living. And second of all, a chef because I love cooking.
Okay, fantastic. Ian, what is music's greatest strength?
Its ability to move people and connect people.
Wow, that was fast. Okay, there's only one more each. Jerod, what piece of music would you take to a desert island?
Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet.
Okay. Vivian, what movie would you take to a desert island?
You give me the most difficult ones. Gandhi.
Okay. Ian, what book would you take?
Previously, I've answered War and Peace.
Mhm.
Maybe I think I'd stick with War and Peace. Just the sheer length of it. You could just sit in that and sit in the storytelling for a long, good time.
I hope you noticed I tried to give you different questions to last time. I think that was the only repeat question, or the fiction and non I'd asked you as well, but I tried to give you new ones. Hey, thank you guys for doing that. It's fun to hear those responses. And actually, it seems like you share a lot of characteristics because a lot of the questions were the same one in a different form. So beautiful. So those of you who are tuning in to watch now, please do write into us if you have any questions for the panel, and we'll most definitely try to get to those questions during the next hour. This coming week, we would have been preparing for the live stream concert that would be broadcast next week, but it was also planned to be a week in which we at the NAC welcomed young artists to join us for intensive professional development work, sitting in the orchestra, conducting, composing, singing, working in administration and in sound production. And even though the concert has been cancelled, fortunately, all of the online seminars and discussions, which includes this Musically Speaking, are still able to go ahead, and you as audience members can tune into many of them. And I mention that because I very much have that dialogue with young artists, with up and coming next generation artists in mind as we approach today's discussion. And I think we might want to dive in with the sort of very big, heavy elephant that has been stubbornly kind of sitting in the performing arts room for the last year and a half, which is the pandemic. Let's talk about it and get it behind us. Jerod, it's when I think about composers, and I spend most of my life thinking about composers as a conductor, all I do is sit at tables and study your music and your thought and try and get inside your minds. It seems to me that the pandemic could either offer a wonderful moment of slowing down of life to focus in on your art, but I wonder also if it can have a dampening effect on inspiration. How have you experienced it from that perspective?
Honestly, I experience it as living life on life's terms. It's temporary, and I have actually reminded myself that 100 years ago it was very similar circumstance, but honestly far worse. And if you look at the art explosion that happened literally 100 years ago, it was unbelievable. And the ability, I mean, their abilities to do things were very, very truncated. You know what I mean? It was very similar circumstance, but I actually believe that we have a lot more benefit. We have this. You couldn't, Stravinsky could not have done, Soldier's Tale like this, or had any kind of contact like this. I have a very silver linings attitude about it. I feel like that we're literally living the Gene Roddenberry dream. We've actually been sitting on this technology for a good 10 years, and we're now like embracing it, which, so I'm kind of a silver linings type of guy. I have been in contact with many, many people. I Zoom a lot. I love it. And my attitude is I've just really leaned into it very heavily. So some things I have more time for, but some things I don't. I mean, I've been homeschooling my kid as well. And so time has just honestly just moved. Just everything just kind of is shifting, and that's shifting back, and we've got another adjustment period. So I see things as very just in flux. And like I said, just kind of living life on life's terms is how I try to wake up and remind myself, okay, today will probably be very different than yesterday. Let's just go with it and make it the best.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful sentiment. I think it's wonderful actually how many people have kind of picked up on that sentiment. People are trying to see the silver lining, make the most of it. And Vivian, you most definitely talking about use of technology and how we've been sitting on it, but now it can be made of use of. You wrote this very, very impactful work, Prayer, quite early on in the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of that piece and how that has then led into work you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I have to echo what Jerod's saying, and I think for me, everything has been intensified. So because we're living in these sort of little bubbles of you know, we can't communicate with other people, you know, we can't touch other people, we can't, you know, we're by ourselves. So for me, everything has been just so much more intensified as a experience, you know, within myself. Right when the shutdown happened, I got a call from the CBC saying that, you know, we would like to take advantage of the situation, as you were talking about, Jerod and Alexander, and see if we can put together a virtual orchestra comprised of orchestral musicians from across the country. And we would like for you to compose a piece for this orchestra. And how could I say no to that? You know, with all the, I know, like, you know, many of the musicians in the orchestra, and also with Yannick conducting, I couldn't say no as well. And so it was something that it was one of these periods that was really intense, because I was also, you know, I have a 5-year-old son, and he was at home 24/7. And basically what happened was I composed the piece in about a week, with the help of my neighbor, because she knew what I was doing, and she helped take care of my son, and I could work during those hours and also at night. And so it became a sentiment of faith, you know, that we were going to get through this. And that's why I named it Prayer. And it's based on a chant by Hildegard van Bingen, talking about, the shepherd that's guiding us through. And so, you know, that kind of started the whole, it laid down the whole sentiment for me to survive this pandemic. And it's been actually really creative ever since then. I don't know, I just poured my whole heart into my music, seeing everything that's been going on, both the ups and the downs, and just, I don't know, it's been really, really cathartic to be able to compose.
It was a hugely successful project, a beautiful piece, and I thought this was very on, you know, people have got quite used to now producing these things online, but it was early on, and it was beautifully produced. So, you know, our collective compliments on the work you did there.
Well, you have to thank the CBC, and you have to thank the mastermind behind it, Denise Ball, who is now a retired executive producer. But she called me and she said, "You can't say no. You can't say no." And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So it was her. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Ian, you began a new role with the Banff Centre, I think, during the pandemic, and you were already COC composer in residence. Did this sort of give you space? You also have a family at home. I know you must have been doing a lot of homeschooling, and your wife too, but did it give you time to focus in on those two core projects in your life, or were you taken in another direction?
Yeah, this year's been such an interesting one for me in that it's sort of ramped up in ways that were unexpected. Certainly the Banff opportunity to be co-artistic director there with Joel Ivany and Karen Slack has been a really fulfilling opportunity. It certainly filled a lot of time. We're spending a lot of time together with the participants and having extremely meaningful conversations. So that's been incredible. The time with the Canadian Opera Company has also been wonderful. The year has looked very different than it was supposed to look, given that live performances were not happening. So some of the work that I would have been doing this year didn't get to happen. And so that did leave some space for the Banff Centre opportunity. And just like the number of projects that have come about, I think as I look back at the year, I see there was my own adjustment period. Just, I think, like there's been everybody's adjustment period to the nature of working in a time of pandemic, both feeling the apathy to create when you're not feeling the human connection with others, and then pushing through that and moving through that and finding new normals. As Jerod and Vivian were both saying, this sense of time shifting. And for me, it was really understanding what a day was and thinking in terms of a day as opposed to a week or a month. And then this beautiful blossoming of new projects that have come about and have been exciting and inspiring and have renewed a new energy in the creative work.
You know, it was sort of what I was asking Jerod as well, is that I think we all know the experience of having to create from within ourselves the idea of interhuman contact and use our imaginations, use our fantasy. That's what you as creative artists do. But I have been wondering how much the impulses of being out in the world, whether it's out, you know, traveling to different countries, to different regions in Canada and being in nature, or whether it's being with other individuals, how much that is a source of energy for the three of you as composers, or whether you, I'm sure you're all different, but whether you all feel comfortable going up to your metaphorical sort of hut in the woods and just letting your imaginations run free. What are your thoughts? Has it impacted the source of inspiration, the pandemic? Any of you?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, it's interesting. I'd be really curious to hear about Jerod and Vivian's approach. I'm a massive introvert, so I love being in the little castle or like the little quarter, the closet in my room, and making things there, but also need the counterbalance of human interaction. And so when those things were muted, or when, I mean, for all of us being parents, having a lot of interaction with certain people, more than we probably historically did, and very little interaction, especially in a physical way, with others that we'd worked with, it's changed that dynamic. But yeah, certainly, I think that what's interesting for me is the nature of the work has changed. When as composers, when we get a commission, often we're asked to pitch a project or pitch an idea. And what I found myself moving toward is ideas that are opportunities to reflect personally on isolation and being distanced or being apart from people, and then trying to push those ideas to places of reconnection through the work itself. But it's interesting to see that change of work.
Absolutely. Jerod, Vivian, you're both based in the US. With again our professional development hats on and thinking about the next generation of composers, what would you say is, from your perspective, the greatest obstacle that has been placed in their way in the last sort of 18 months? I'm thinking of young composers here, or do you think that actually there haven't been big obstacles for that kind of work?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword because you know, everything is about making connections, and so, you know, your world is somewhat limited because you're not able, you know. When I was a student, I would, you know, the surefire way of making connections is going to concerts and finding out who has been doing what, and meeting performers and meeting conductors and you know, getting your way around the community around you and making new friends. So that was, you know, the plus. And I think, you know, because of the pandemic, you've lost that ability to kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, network or to find out about people around your community, which, you know, I've also lost that opportunity as well. But I think it's also an opportunity because the pandemic has forced us, and the events around it, I think, has forced us to really look inward as an industry as far as the injustices of what has been happening in the past generation or two or three, about, you know, programming and, you know, and it's wonderful what you've done, Alexander, in just the past few months as far as programming. And I think it's an opportunity actually for younger composers to really think about things in different terms, and for the whole industry to reflect on that. And I hope we don't lose that momentum of, I hope this is not just a trend that, you know, oh, you know, because of Black Lives Matter, we have to, you know, program music by people of color, but once this is over, we're going to go back. I hope that's not the trend, and that we continue this dialogue of what it means to be relevant, what classical music means to be relevant in our today's society. So I think that is a grand opportunity that we've really fostered in this pandemic, and I hope
absolutely. And I mean, I would like later in our conversation to talk about the three of you have written operas, and very recently and at the moment are sort of in that place, and of course a great way that music connects with all different kinds of communities is through storytelling, whether it's literal and you can hear words and you can understand what the story is, or whether it is through the abstract use of sound. But I've always found in other fields, for me, if I didn't have a connection to a work of art, if I had a friend who was able to contextualize it and talk about the story the art was telling, suddenly I could spend an hour with a single work rather than just saying, do I like it or do I not? You know, it moved away from this binary like, dislike into having an actual relationship. But before we get there into sort of opera and the storytelling that the three of you do, I just wanted to touch on the how this time has affected young people, and to touch on something specific there, which actually goes beyond the pandemic and speaks to the multivariate nature of our times. We're working with these young professionals on the concept of adaptability and adaptive mindset. The premise being that now, perhaps more than ever before, a musician has to have the capability to adapt to different repertoire, to different platforms, to different media, and so on and so forth. And that it might be helpful to consciously work on the principle of being adaptive, to say that I'm going to actively learn what it feels like to adapt and to sort of critique myself from that perspective. Jerod, do you agree with the premise that adaptability is a key skill for a contemporary musician, or do you see it differently?
Always, absolutely. I think it's critical to humans, and it has been ever since humans have ever existed. And adaptability is a reflection of people's willingness to embrace a circumstance and make it great, and that's what movies are made of. Is like that's what a hero story is somebody's ability not just to adapt, but to actually make it something new that actually inspires people. So I don't see it as just survival, but I see it as thriving through a circumstance. And so I think a big mess. Look, the trees have been shaken, and I think that's actually a really, really good thing. And my great heroes in the arts and in history have been people who have adapted. I mean, my tribe walked 800 miles in mud, 150 years ago. I can do this. It's okay. So I find a lot of inspiration through that. So I kind of start with a place of gratitude, honestly. Like, I'm grateful. I've got wonderful things already in my life. But yes, adapting is always it, but then also creating and making and thriving and having that willingness to do that is really what marks everything. That's what I've seen professionally. Is I feel that I've seen organizations and people with high levels of willingness to just go and like, okay, and they're with eyes wide open. That's fabulous. And I'm so inspired by my colleagues, including y'all who are doing this. And I think that's great. We're fueling each other, I think, in really great ways.
Adapting to different situations implies also adapting from something. So having a center, and I think for any person, forget about musicians, but for any person trying to center yourself in life, having a sense of core, and specifically in your work as composers, finding your voice, whatever that may be, and as much as it might evolve throughout a lifetime, I imagine is also a particular challenge. Vivian, do you feel like there were moments that you look back on when you had a sense of finding your voice, or are you yet to have that feeling in life?
I think identity is a really important question, and it's like, for especially for a composer, and it's something that, I mean, ebbs and flows. But I think for me, I consider myself a late bloomer because of the fact that even though I got a stellar musical education, went through the ranks at Juilliard and got my doctorate, blah, blah, blah. I feel like it was not until after all that I really just acknowledged myself for who I was. I went through school listening to all the should haves and could haves and all that, and did all those exercises, but I didn't really see me in that. And really, it wasn't until I traveled to Asia that I had this cathartic moment of, this could be something special. This is healing. This is getting back to my ancestors, to connecting to my DNA, and that is really grounding. And hence my early fascination with gamelan music and the virtuosity of that, and also the process in which you learn music is so entirely different. Everything is not written down. Everything is just by ear. And so for me, it was like an opening of sorts, and it continues to be the idea of going back to your roots. Recently, since the pandemic, and this relates to the storytelling part, I've always wanted to do this, but never really found the opportunity to, or found the guts to, frankly. I've started an oral history of my family. So I've through Zoom, I'm interviewing my family, and specifically my extended family that escaped the Cambodian genocide. So I was born in 1975. During the time they were in the jungle for 40 days, and my mother was like, beside herself trying to find out where. It was, a group of 13 of us, and including my grandmother and my aunts and uncles and cousins. And so I'm going back to each one of these people and interviewing them to find out about their experience and what happened, and more about my family. And I've been to Cambodia once. I would like to go back there as a research project. And this ties into my opera project because the opera scenes for this upcoming Edmonton Opera project is based on the oral history specifically of my cousin, who was three years old at the time. And so the libretto is based on her oral history. Wow. So yeah, I mean, I think that for me, identity is sort of like a moving target, but for me, it's getting back to the core of, the DNA and where you come from, and yeah, getting in touch with your family, and finding out more about who you are.
Absolutely. And I mean, Ian, when I think about translating that centering of oneself as a person, which is what Vivian is in a sense alluding to, right? It's the idea that in order to maybe create, one needs to also find oneself, and be that through discovering family, your DNA, literally, as you put it. One still needs to translate that into the medium of music. And I always, every time I open a score, you will naturally see connections with other languages that have come before. And I remember, Ian, you and I have unpicked this before. I remember first hearing your music and hearing French Impressionism in there, hearing mid 20th century and early 20th century German composers. And yet you continue to take those ingredients and mold your own musical language. But it's in a sense, of course, the things are connected, but it's in a sense that musical question I'm very interested to hear from the two of you is does one ever feel like those ingredients that one, for one reason or other, sort of pulls off the shelves, because we have an unending number of musical, languages to grab from nowadays. It's one of the great challenges, I think, of a composer, is where do you start? But does one ever feel like you get to a point where I'm now going to shed those, and I have whatever my voice is, I'm not thinking consciously about it, and I'm just going to move forward? Or is that's way too simplistic, I suppose? Ian, what do you think?
I think, understanding musical voice identity as a composer is one of discovery. It's one of writing a lot. I think that is writing a lot and then looking back at what one's written to discover what you gravitate toward, or what kind of pieces make up that work. So for me, it's that actually goes back to storytelling as well. What kinds of stories am I drawn to? Do I want to be a part of musicalizing or putting on a stage or putting in front of an audience? And it's a process of self-discovery and learning by looking back at what one's done. And then, as you say, how that moves forward and how that develops, I think the more, especially a young composer, is writing. I can't emphasize enough how volume is important to a certain extent. Quality, I think, is important, but doing it a lot, I think you become, it's like working a muscle out. It's strengthened, but it also learns to do things almost independently of your thinking. So for me, like color palettes that I'm always drawn to, or that come through, are this kind of tonal language, but turned on its head a little bit. It's usually lyrical. It has lush moments, but it has angularity. And I've discovered that that's what I'm interested in by looking back at what I do. And then it's with the next project, always saying, how could I push this in a different direction? How could I try this other thing? How could I play with this rhythmic idea? And setting little test pieces or test activities up to push all of the boundaries of what that musical language is, that's been sort of the process of uncovering and growing and developing a musical language. But again, it only happens through doing a lot of it.
Mm.
Well, I remember a friend once said to me, who was a writer, they said, you can't be a writer or call yourself a writer and never write anything. There's something of the fantasy of being the composer, but the reality of being the composer is actually a lot of time by yourself, a lot of time of self-doubt, and a lot of time just saying, is that the right idea, or is that the best idea, or how can I develop that idea?
And I think it was, was it Hemingway who just like said, you got to write every day, you got to sit down and do it. And, but I mean, for conductors, for example, one of the concerns I have for young conductors over the last year and a half, and it's not dissimilar to composers, is that unless you're in front of an ensemble, you can't really learn very much. You have to learn to work with people. You have to learn to figure out how to rehearse. How do you become efficient? How do you forget your body and use your ears when you're conducting? So a lot of young conductors, you can see them thinking about which way their arms are moving. You can't possibly listen if you're doing that. So I feel for them that this year and a half of practice in front of ensembles might be lost. And for composers, of course, there's the in the room writing. How important? Because if you have a strong musical mind, you could imagine everything you're writing. But how important is then the contact with the ensembles, the individuals, the symphony orchestras who are going to be playing or singing your music for growing? Any of you, maybe Ian, just pick up on that thought for a moment.
Yeah, I think just quickly, it's critical. I mean, you learn only by doing, but then also the doing requires the completion or the next step, which is the human interaction. I think of, especially writing for the voice, learning to write well for the voice is about having singers sing your work and hearing where they falter, where they're struggling, where it doesn't really work the way you thought. I once wrote for a more dramatic coloratura soprano voice, and I was sort of thinking them as being this light-ish, flippy, lighter voice, and I realized, oh, you can't write the same way. And like an elastic band, they explained to me, you have to, if you're going to pull the top end, you've got to pull the bottom end as well. And that's part of the craft of doing that. And like I could have written a million things for this singer, but until they actually put it in their body and then told me and showed me what was successful and what wasn't, did I actually.
Well, and you see that in particularly in earlier music, where there was this very regular contact between the person writing and the person performing. It would happen within the day. You see that aria X was tailored completely to an individual's voice, and piece Y was tailored to a specific ensemble that had certain weaknesses, or stuff like that. But Jerod, to come back to you, there's this lovely quote in your biography from the Washington Post saying you have this rare ability to effectively infuse classical music with American Indian nationalism, and it's an interesting quote. It says a lot in a short space. But when I was looking, for example, at the movement we were going to perform, the moccasin game, right, or moccasin dance, you did exactly that. It's amazing. It is so sophisticated that it seems really, really simple. But I wonder, when you think of those two terms, classical music and American Indian nationalism, what are the greatest challenges for you in bringing them together?
There is absolutely no challenge.
Really? Okay.
It's like asking me, it's like, which box of awesome do you want to check? I'll take both. And I'll live with them both. It's honestly, I feel like a kid in a candy shop.
Mm.
And you're talking about this whole connection thing and human stories. I mean, these are honestly kind of obvious questions. We all work towards connection. I mean, the movie Omega Man ends with connection. I mean, it's like you start lonely. The whole drive is to connect. And when we're composing in our studios, we're anticipating relationships. Like we're living both isolation and great connection at the exact same time, and then it just comes in different forms. Sometimes you're live, it's just all various, but we're all looking for connection no matter what we're doing, and that's just being human. It's just like, are you going to eat today? Well, of course I'm going to, because I'm human. So the connection thing is just always an inevitable thing. But getting back to the thing, that quote from Gail was was really validating when I read it. But honestly, to me, it's a lot of fun. I don't find any challenge, and I'm inspired by great artistic heroes who all leaned into their own ethos of their own identity anyway, and many of those identities were ethnic and national. And of course, now identity can be anything. There's 8 billion people on the planet. There's 8 billion ways to be a person, and everybody has a very, very strong type of identity. And so so to me, it's just it's honestly, it's just a lot of fun, and I give myself permission to be what I need to be in the moment. It's something I was very inspired by with Prokofiev. Prokofiev is a really good example. He was able to write with very different languages one day to the next, and he gave himself permission to be as flexible as he ever wanted to be at any time he wanted to be. And so I give myself that same permission. And I grew up in the dance world as well. The choreographers that, I mean, like with Martha Graham, Ruth St. Dennis, Isadora Duncan, Agnes DeMille. I mean, these folks were they were constantly giving themselves permission to be exactly who they needed to be in the moment. And I think that's really, really important. And that's what I try to teach kids. When I teach kids composition, stylistic restrictions, none, zero. You be exactly what you want to be. My job is to help you make it the highest piece of art possible. Style-wise, it could be anything, So anyway, that's just kind of some answers.
I don't know if you guys ever think about it, but I've throughout my life, I've found one question fascinating. I sometimes get the impression that I might share more in common with a 21st century Peruvian and Namibian than with an 18th century British guy. And we never talk about time like that, right? We never think about time actually being something that unifies people. We particularly nowadays, we think about culture and geographical space and cultural heritage. But I mean, we don't need to talk about it, but I've always found it interesting. I think that if I met an 18th century British guy, I would have very, very little in common with him. Very few shared experiences. The worlds are so fundamentally different. And yet if I go the other side of the world and a culture that I would consider very different from my own, we would have so many touch points. So anyway, that's just as an aside. With our professional development program in mind, to each of you, maybe starting with Vivian, what do you look for? What qualities do you look for in a musician that is engaging with your work?
Well, I love collaboration. So I think first and foremost, the performer is enthusiastic about new music and specifically working together with you as the composer. So being open and flexible and willing to experiment, I think is wonderful. And I love, and frankly, the exchange of the back and forth. Oh, does this work? Or maybe this is better, or does this fit your voice better? Or, that, I mean, in an ideal residency and collaboration, and even with orchestras, I mean, it's that back and forth that you really learn from. And I continually learn from performers. It's not like, oh, you're now, such and such, and that's done with learning. No, it's like a lifelong process. And I learned so much from that interaction with performers. And I think really, I really love to compose pieces for a specific person. I don't like to compose in a vacuum. I don't like to, even for orchestras, I like to compose for a specific orchestra. And then afterwards, the afterlife of the composition really will speak to that, but with the strengths and the fortes of that performer or that ensemble, it's just so gratifying to hear that come to fruition. So I think that back and forth is really, really important, and that willingness to go back and forth and to do that sort of that messy process of being creative.
And it might be that we look back and if it was ever really the case, then this idea of the composer in their ivory tower just composing for themselves, and if someone likes it, they like it. That, I think we might all look back and say there was a very, very brief window of time sometime in the 20th century, because before that, and I feel now, that's not the way it works. It's like, who are the performers? Can we talk? Can we interact? Can we build this together? Which does seem like the most sort of organic way to do it. Ian.
It was brief and unfortunate.
Right. That's absolutely one way to put it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I was going to answer your question too by saying, I think for me, I love when performers can bring ideas to the work. So it's very similar, I think, to what Vivian's saying. But for example, I actually don't love it when you get this kind of hollowing of the composer, and I've spoken about this a lot. I feel very uncomfortable if someone has that approach to me, because I don't see it as that. I see us as all collaborators and on an equal plane. So there's a sense of like, just, use what's on the page, don't just discard it completely, but then bring your own set of ideas. And I much prefer that. And I think that's more exciting to hear what new and fresh ideas that you'll inspire me with when you perform this work. And the idea of writing for an ensemble or for a particular person, I was orchestrating these songs for this concert. And because I had the wonderful privilege of being with the orchestra for a long time, I was literally thinking of all of the players as I would just write a little solo line. I know who's going to play that, or very likely who would play that, what they do. I've had a drink with them, so I know them on a personal level. And that level of connection, you feel very integrated to the ensemble that's performing. And it's not this object, but rather these are all human beings that are going to bring that little melodic idea to life in the context of that wider piece.
Beautiful. Jerod, you've just moving on to this question of vocal music and spoken word, which Ian just alluded to. You've written a great deal of choral work over the years, and obviously the voice, I assume then, is something that's close to your heart. But I read that you've recently completed a project of a completely different order of magnitude, a grand opera in 2 acts. Could you tell us about it? It's called Shell Shaker, I believe.
I'm composing that right now. It premieres March 5th. Next year. And so I appreciate that. Real quick, just a little perspective on this. Performers champion themselves of being unique interpreters of great composers. So Yevgeny Kissin plays Beethoven very differently than Rubinstein did, and they champion themselves. Within tribal communities, it's the same. We sing our tribal songs differently, and families are known for singing it one way or the other, and it's encouraged. I think it's encouraged. And so I love the idea. To me, it's wonderful to hear how somebody reinterprets my music, because they're paying me the same compliment that they would Beethoven by taking the same piano sonata and making it their own as a performer. I think that's pretty cool, and I want to be seen as repertoire like that. So anyway, but the opera itself, I'm very excited about, because it's the tale of how we received our turtle rattles for our cultural music. I mean, we're stomp dancers, we're shell shakers, and that most of the woodlands are. And so we have a story of an unlikely hero, this young girl who has to go to the forest, of course, because everybody goes to the forest to find themselves and discover things in life. And she comes back with this gift, and she brings culture and shell shaking back to her tribe. And so it is a 2-act opera, and it's just perfect. It's just really, really beautiful. And the first act, honestly, really fits like the same arc as Turandot does. It has this constant build. In the very end, when she's told by the river that she has to go to the forest, is a very, very big moment. And so I don't want to give away too many things about it, but it's just, the legend itself just lends itself to opera so beautifully, and I'm very excited about it. It's sung entirely in the Chickasaw language, and it's another an opportunity for me just to use our tribal tunes as a melodic base for it.
I was going to ask, it's Chickasaw is the language, is that how you pronounce it?
Well, traditionally it's Chickasaw, but we say Chickasaw now. Yeah.
Okay. And is it a language that lends itself well to vocal writing? Were there any challenges there? Or?
Every human language does. Every human language sounds beautiful on the concert stage. Yeah. I'm happy to report.
Yeah. As long as, I suppose, one's in it and one, really comprehends the language and is,
It's all human language. It's serious. I'm not joking. Every language I've heard ever sounds beautiful sung.
Yeah. It's true. I'm a German speaker, and it's just one of those languages where people go, ugh. But I say the same thing. I'm just like, it's such a beautiful language. It's a devastatingly beautiful language. It's just, if it's spoken the wrong way, it can sound awful, right?
Yeah. As every language can. I say it because I just have a very large optimism about it. I love it. And my experience has been, I mean, I've worked with 20, 25 different native languages from North America, and every single experience, look, that's their wheelhouse. Vocalists' jam is to learn languages and make them sound beautiful. I mean, we're working with our allies when we're working with vocalists. That's what they do. So it's like, it's a welcome. It's like, give me more. It's like, and vocalists now sing so many different languages, and they're always looking for beautiful ways to present them. So boy, are we just handed, it's like it's on a silver platter for a composer. If you're working with vocalists, that's what they want to do.
Did you write the libretto yourself, or?
Yes, I do my own librettos, and then I'm not fluent in the language, and so I work with tribal members to translate. Right. And the translations themselves are different than the English, and so they're kind of parallel, but we try to make it. I mean, remember, we're also pushing our native languages too, because we're not aboriginally poets. And we don't like traditionally abstract languages like European languages have been doing for so many centuries. So I'm actually asking tribal members to break down our language and reconstitute it in a poetic fashion as well. So that process has always been a wonderful and positive process and very challenging. It's look, we're all humans are intellectuals and love to be challenged with stuff like that, and so it always brings in creative juices. So I do create the English versions, and then they're translated, and we work together to come up with the final libretto in the language.
And the premiere is in March, you said. If people want to come and hear it, they should check out your website for the date.
March 5th, the Holyoke College Symphony is playing. They're part of the UMass Amherst college system there. Right. And Tien Hui Ung is conducting that, and it's actually going to be premiered as a concert version, but in full costume. Margaret Wheeler is creating all the traditional costumes for that. And so, but it'll be kind of like Les Mis, like the concert. I love it. I love it.
Fantastic. And Vivian, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you and Ian are actually both working with Edmonton Opera at the moment to create. Maybe we could just start with your project. You talked about going to Cambodia, about working there. You're both actually working with Royce Fabric, aren't you, as librettist? Maybe you could tell us a little about
he's a dream librettist for us. I think, personal, I don't know about Ian. Maybe Ian thinks of maybe differently, but I think he's just absolutely wonderful. He took so I had questions for my cousin, and she answered them. And Royce just made magic out of the libretto, and he just took that and constructed these two scenes that are just absolutely beautiful. They're called Grover and Friends and Alarm. So you have to stay tuned if you want to know what that means. And Royce and I are trying to see if we can both go to Cambodia together to do more research about the music there, experiences with the people. I would like to expand my oral history, and then we'd like to, see if we can weave this into a bigger project for the future.
You really, again, this is sort of gleaning from things you say and then reading your biography. You're not a sort of musical tourist who goes somewhere for a week, listens to a couple of things, and goes home. You really, you played in gamelan ensembles, didn't you? You really dig in and delve into the cultures.
Well, I mean, I think that's the only way to do it, because otherwise you're appropriating. You're kind of just going in and grabbing what you feel like in, and then just getting out. I mean, without really truly understanding and respecting the culture that you're borrowing from. And I think that, I don't want to disturb the piece as far as Cambodian traditional music, but I want to do it from perspective of my own sort of experience with PTSD. And it's really from that angle, the PTSD angle, that I experienced and my whole family experienced, that I'm approaching this. And so it's a more, I don't know, it's relevant to me, and I think relevant to a lot of people and what they're experiencing.
When does it premiere again, the opera?
That is a very good question, because it was actually supposed to be filmed this June, actually next month, but because of the pandemic, everything has been postponed, and we're hoping that we can get it done in October. So.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. And
yes.
and Ian, your production with Edmonton Opera is with Royce Fabric is.
Yeah, and I can confirm that all that Vivian has said about Royce is absolutely true to my experience. Just a really great guy and a very good collaborator, a brilliant guy. So we're actually working on a work, or we finished the work. It's based on Thomas King's Indians on Vacation, which was a novel. Actually, it's shortlisted for the Governor General's Award this year. Novel from last year, which is a story. I mean, this will tell you a lot about myself and my interests. It's a story about an indigenous couple that is on vacation in Prague. So the entire novel takes place in Prague. And they're also at a point in their life where they're in their middle age. They're looking back at their children who've moved out, and they're having this sort of second stage or maybe third stage of their life together, with the reflections that are both looking back and looking forward. And so to me, this is really, really interesting. I love contemporary stories. I love stories that focus on segments of the population that we never really see or hear about, or aren't as maybe glamorous as the young, whatever, ingenue or whatever. And also the fact that they're doing this exceedingly middle-class activity in Prague, and they're touring the city and reflecting on their lives together. But the other interesting piece is that there is a chorus of demons, and these demons live inside the husband's mind. And so they're dramatized on stage, and there's a lovely aria that the wife Mimi has, and I think it's going to be a really special scene. Yeah, and I'm also working with Royce on another project based on another novel, The Englishman's Boy, with another team, and that one has other creators involved in it as well.
And you're also creating Empire of the Wild, I think, aren't you?
Empire of Wild, which is based on Cherie Dimeline's a novel. And the interesting thing is Cherie, so who wrote The Marrow Thieves, which is a runaway success, she's from the same town as I am. We come right from Midland, Penetanguishene area. Our families are married about 4 generations back. So we're sort of cousins by association. But that's a big scale opera with some companies, and it's a very exciting project to be a part of.
Well, I know that many of our audience members live today and watching back after the fact will know your music collectively, Jerod, Ian, and Vivian. But for those of you who don't, and when travel opens up, go and hear these premieres. These are just consummate artists, and whatever they create is going to be so exciting and interesting. We have only a couple of minutes, maybe from each of you, with our young artists in mind. If you had a piece of advice for your younger selves, what would it be? Maybe Jerod, you could kick us off. I think you're muted there still.
That's right. Sorry, but I make all the same mistakes.
Yeah. That's lovely. That's lovely. Vivian?
Trust your instincts. Listen to your own voice inside your head.
And Ian?
When you hit the point where you feel like you can't move forward in a work, push through. Sometimes let it sit for a day, but push through and continue the idea to some place of completion.
Beautiful. Well, on cue, my 2-year-old son has come in and started to scream. So, I want to thank each of you for giving up an hour of your precious time today. I am so sad that we're not going to be performing your music next week. I was so looking forward to it, as was the orchestra, but this is a postponement of those pieces, not a cancellation. And I look forward to many more years of continuing these discussions. So thank you to each of you, and every success with the projects you're working on at the moment. And for you, our audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. Next week on May 26th, there'll be another Musically Speaking. The roles will be reversed. The conductor Naomi Wu will be leading a conversation where I will be a guest, talking about how a conductor prepares for a week of work with an orchestra. And then the next day, Thursday, May 27th, I will be speaking with pianist, composer, improvisers Gabriela Montero and Stuart Goodyear, sort of unpacking how they work, how they think, and how they bring those different roles and those guises musically together in their careers. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to the entire team behind the curtain who have made this possible today. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Stay safe, everyone, and thanks for being with us.